meeting to order. Welcome to your City Commission meeting. Today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2020. Please turn off or silence all cell phones during the meeting. Meetings are televised every day on Channel 2 at 7 p.m. and midnight and available for viewing on YouTube. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by silent meditation? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. First order of business today is a new employee welcome ceremony. And we're going to welcome newly hired regular full-time and part-time City of Leavenworth employees. I'll be calling your names, and you'll be coming up here and getting a note welcoming you to the city, and also a City of Leavenworth pin. We're going to begin with Christopher Crisp. Chris was hired, is he here? Chris, come on up. Chris was hired on August 1st, 2019 as a solid waste collector. Chris graduated from Leavenworth High School and previously worked at the Leavenworth Golf Club doing golf cart maintenance. So, welcome to the city, and I've got your welcome note, your pin, and you can say a few words or no. Yeah, you can all say words, and believe me, you won't get in trouble for me to supervise. I have it on good account that won't happen, but it's up to you. The next is Brandon Haley. Brandon? Brandon was hired on September 5th, 2019 as a solid waste collector. Brandon is a graduate of Emporia High School and previously worked for the City of Emporia in the solid waste department. Welcome, Brandon. Your note and your pin. Congratulations. Thank you. Welcome to the city. Next is Adam Armstrong. Adam was hired, come on up, Adam. Adam was hired on September 12th, 2019 as a solid waste collector. Adam received his high school diploma from Atchison County Community High School. Adam previously worked for Triumph Foods as an operator. Welcome to the city, and good luck to you. Sure you don't want to say something?
Thank you guys for this opportunity.
Good. Okay. Good luck to you. No, you really can say something. Not going to get in trouble, at least from the mayor. Next, we have Austin Dyke. I hope I pronounced that right. Did I pronounce that right? Yes, sir. Okay, good. Austin was hired on January 9th, 2020 as a police officer. Austin graduated from Mill Valley High School and received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Pittsburgh State University. Great. Welcome to the city and the police force. Congratulations. Good luck to you.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Want to say anything? Go ahead.
I really appreciate the opportunity to serve the city. Thank you all.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next is Matthew Adele. Matthew? Have I pronounced that right? Or Adel? Okay. Matthew was hired on January 9th, 2020 as a firefighter. Matthew graduated from Spring Hill High School and received his Fire Academy certification from Hutchinson Community College. Welcome, Matthew.
I appreciate it.
And you can say a word or two? Okay, all right, good luck to you. Good luck to you. Next is Lawrence Levine. Lawrence, come on up. Better known as Chip, at least to his friends. Lawrence was hired on January 23rd, 2020 as a rental property coordinator. Lawrence graduated from Monmouth Regional High School in Tinton Falls, New Jersey. He received a BA in political science and journalism from George Washington University. He received an MA in military arts and science from the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, and a second Master's of Arts in information management and computer resources from Webster University. Very glad to have you on board, Chip, and, okay. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Honor and a privilege to serve the people of our community.
Great to have you on board. Thanks.
Chip.
Next is Tasha Buselt. I hope I pronounced that right. Did I pronounce it right or not? Okay, good. Tasha was hired on February 6, 2020 as a telecommunications specialist. Tasha is a graduate of Lansing High School and previously worked in the warehouse at Amazon. Welcome to the city, Tasha. Here you go. Great to have you on board. Would you like to say anything? Okay, thank you. How about a round of applause for... And look, we're really happy to have all of you join the city of Leavenworth. You've joined a good team, a dedicated team, and an effective team. So good luck to you, and we'll see you around the city. So first item under old business is consideration of previous meeting minutes from February 25th, 2020 regular meeting. Are there any comments or questions about the minutes? No. If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the minutes from February 25th, 2020, regular meeting.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to approve the minutes from our February 25th, 2020 regular meeting. We will begin voting with Commissioner Preisinger.
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. The vote is 5-0. The minutes from our meeting on February 25th, 2020 are approved. Next is second consideration ordinance 8124, stormwater improvements financing.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, this is a second reading of putting the funding in place for the project we've referred to as Second and Chestnut, approximately $3 million stormwater project. There's one very small change from the first reading to the second reading. The first reading referenced KSA 12-631T, and it's been changed to 12-631S. So it's just that change from 631T to 631S, referencing a state statute.
Now, this is what is for the approval of the general obligation bond for
Yes, sir.
that project?
Yes, sir.
Up to what?
A little over $3 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it just for the one project, or is it for Independence Court too? I know the main project. is
Right,
there,
right.
so-
Yeah, and Independence Court as well.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, any questions or comments on this particular agenda item? So this requires a roll call vote. We'll begin voting with Commissioner Wilson.
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. Vote is 5-0. We've approved ordinance 8124, stormwater improvements financing. Thank you. New business. Are there any of our citizens in the audience who would like to come forward and present or discuss any items not listed on the agenda, or to provide a petition? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go to the general items under our agenda. And the first one is Army Corps of Engineers presentation.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, I'd like to introduce Eric Shoemate from the Army Corps of Engineers. City Commission has inquired in the past about learning more about the Missouri River Basin and how essentially upstream waters affect the city of Leavenworth in light of our flooding. So we invited through, I'd like to also point out that Chuck McGaha, the county's emergency management director, is here as well. Chuck helped us facilitate bringing Eric here tonight, and so he has a presentation on the Missouri River Basin, and he's here also to answer questions you may have.
Well, welcome, Eric. Thank you for coming.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commission. It's a pleasure to be here and help share the information that we have from the Corps of Engineers. My name, again, is Eric Shoemate. I'm an engineer with the Corps here in Kansas City District. I live in Riverside, Missouri, so not far from here. And I'm the chief of our hydrologic engineering and manage the local lakes in Kansas City District. None that affect the flow that comes through the river here, but 18 reservoirs and dams across 4 states. So just a quick overview of where we are. The Kansas City District's one of 5 districts in the Northwestern Division of the Army Corps of Engineers. The Northwestern Division is the largest land division of the Corps, covers about 1/4 of the United States. We're married up with 3 districts that are in the Columbia River Basin out west, Walla Walla, Seattle, and Portland. Then we share the Missouri River Basin with our sister district in Omaha and then Kansas City District. The main stem dams, you've probably heard of them, or you've heard of Gavin's Point Dam, I think is a common one that you hear. These dams are ran, I'll flip back real quick. So our division office is actually out in Portland, Oregon, but we also have a division office presence in Omaha, Nebraska. It's actually our division office in Omaha that operates these 5 main stem, or the 6 main stem dams. I'm here from Kansas City just to present the information, just so that they were didn't have to come down from Omaha, and they were happy to allow me to do it. So the 6 main stem dams start Fort Peck up in Montana, and then as you move downstream, east and south, Garrison Dam is in near Bismarck, North Dakota, then Oahe in South Dakota, Big Bend, Fort Randall, and Gavin's Point as you come downstream. Gavin's Point being the last of the system, and what comes out of Gavin's Point really kind of makes the open Missouri River flow that you see, or at least a portion thereof. Those 6 dams are run together as a system. They're operated using the Missouri Water Control Manual. It's often referred to as the master manual. You'll hear that quite often in news and discussions, whether it be congressional discussions. We've had quite a few with the governors and local Congress, congressional staffs as well. So the current version of the Water Control Manual was issued in November of 2018. It really dictates based on how much water we're seeing in the system and the conditions downstream, how are those 6 reservoirs managed. It's really the guidelines. There's some flexibility for operations for our division office up in Omaha that makes these decisions. A little bit of flexibility that they can work within this manual, but it really kind of prescribes the framework, the sideboards left and right of where we can make the releases that we can make and the decisions that will go into that. So the master manual, the reservoirs were built with the 7 authorized purposes in mind. All 7 of those cover flood control, navigation, water supply, hydropower, fish and wildlife, irrigation, recreation, and water quality. Now there's 8 purposes, but there's 1 priority, and our priority is always on operating for life and safety of people and property. And the operational decisions, as it's noted up there, are driven by just how much water comes into the system every year. It's an annual operation, so what comes in every year, for the most part, has to go back out where we're at. So we try not to keep flood water from one year into the next year, so that we're fully poised to operate for the next year and be able to provide the full flood control benefits of these projects each and every year that we start. The primary, as it says up there, the primary decision making is driven by flood control, how much water to let out of those reservoirs based on downstream conditions. Navigation, we support navigation for an 8-month season from April 1 to the end of November. And then also water supply. Water supply is driven more so in the winter months Kinda we define how much water we're letting out in the winter, so that we can keep water supply inlets, with water. City of Kansas City is one of the toughest ones to keep water up on their water supply, so, that kinda drives a lot of the winter, where we set our lowest flow releases.
I have a question about navigation.
Yes.
Is there, I don't see much navigation in this portion of the Missouri River. Is that just because I'm not looking, or has it changed from like 20, 25 years ago, or?
It has changed.
Right.
There's a push to get more navigation. I mean, the navigation industry themselves have been very engaged. There's been a few more actually tows coming upstream over the
Okay.
past few years. Water in the system allows that,
Okay.
you know, better. But primarily the navigation's downstream of Kansas City, but it does.
Okay,
The channel does extend all the way up to Sioux City.
appreciate that. Yeah.
But, so, the hydropower, fish and wildlife, irrigation, recreation, water quality, those are mostly, those benefit from the, releases that are being made for flood control, navigation, water supply. Obviously, you're generating power as the water's coming out of the dam. Same fish and wildlife are able to benefit from both, water in the reservoirs and downstream. Same with, recreation, both sides, but, the primary, just, you know, what day-to-day drives most decisions are those top three that we have identified there. And then on the bottom, we do comply with all federal laws, which includes the Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act amongst others as well. So this is, I guess you can see it pretty well there. What you see, okay, I can bring this up here. So these are the watersheds that go into each one of these reservoirs. Again, Fort Peck up here in Montana. And down to Leavenworth here, I marked, there's about 427,000 square miles of drainage that comes past Leavenworth. The amount of water that or the land that passes through these 6 reservoirs is 279,000 square miles. So that leaves a ballpark of 150,000 square miles upstream of Leavenworth that doesn't have any reservoir regulation. So while I say this because while we see what's coming out of Gavin's, I know a lot of people, a lot of us have it ingrained in our mind to watch what's the releases from Gavin's Point. That's really just a portion of it. There's, like I said, 150,000 square miles that if it rains on that area, that's what comes by here as well, you know, and it's not passing through a reservoir. There's no reservoir slowing it down, that other portion. So when it comes to flood exposure in this area down, you know, St. Joseph and downstream, it really is driven primarily by, historically by the rainfall just hitting the basin and where it hits. And, you know, the Platte River Basin here that comes through Nebraska, it covers most of Nebraska, and rainfall that falls anywhere in this area here, you know, just kind of enters in that Platte River and comes on downstream. And then we also get quite a bit of flow that comes off of, you know, just kind of this Four Corners area of Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas. So
Last year, we had 2 flooding events here in Leavenworth. So it's your assessment that primarily, we had a lot of rain early last spring, you know, throughout the spring and even the early summer. Was that the major factor that caused the flooding events here in the city?
yeah, so last year there was two primary events that came through. One about a year ago at March, right
Yeah,
around St.
yeah.
Patrick's Day.
Right.
I spent St. Patrick's Day overnight on a levee in St. Joseph, watching the water. The water was actually higher than the top of the levee. It was on sandbags up there. But it managed to pass that along without having any failures. But that was they call it bomb cyclone event, or it rained in this area primarily. There was snow on the ground since it was so early. It was a really cold winter last year. We had deep, you know, almost 2 foot thick of frozen ground. So it was like raining on a parking lot. It melted all the snow that was sitting there, and it all came off together.
Okay.
So in that event, there was a little over 300,000, numbers might not mean anything, but 300,000 cubic feet per second of flow coming down the Missouri River. At the peak, the Gavin's Point had about 100,000 coming out of it, and then there was over 200,000 coming out of this uncontrolled, unregulated area. in March. Later in the year,
Yeah.
late May, June was kind of the other one that came through. And at that point, we were really down to only about 50-60,000 coming out of Gavin's Point Dam with the, that left about 200,000 again was coming out of the uncontrolled areas, so. But it is definitely important to watch what's coming out of Gavin's Point, but then, to be aware that it takes generally rain events to hit, the.
So in that uncontrolled area, is there anything in the future that could be done to mitigate the, the effects to St. Joseph and Leavenworth and, I mean,
Currently, there's not something in the plans. Like I said, one of the biggest watersheds there is the Platte River coming out of Nebraska.
Yeah.
There's not any, there's not, even through the Pick Sloan plan that helped define much of these upstream reservoirs, there wasn't anything on that. It's just so flat, it's hard to make a dam in a really flat area. It would just have to,
right.
go forever to keep the water from flanking around.
And that would probably be the only type of solution would be to build a dam or?
Yeah, some kind of a storage, to where you could catch that flood water and let it out slower.
Okay.
So the main stem system, I wasn't wanting to minimize the role that it does play, because it does have, it affects 280,000 square miles that come into it. These upper two reservoirs, Fort Peck and Garrison, have a considerable amount of snow melt that come into each of those off of the mountains.
Yeah.
And then they each offer some manner of capturing snowpack that sets out on the plains and melts in early spring, and then also any rainfall that comes in. So they do offer a considerable amount of flood control benefits, but whenever it's the peak flows that are coming down,
Sure.
They're generally holding quite a bit of water, and then it's the rain events downstream. But these reservoirs, they always refer to the upper three, Fort Peck, Garrison, and Oahe as the big three. They're just by far and away the largest reservoirs we have in the Corps of Engineers Missouri River Basin, relatively on how much water they hold. When it gets down and you start talking about like Gavin's Point and last year's March event, the water that comes into there really is no flood control storage at Gavin's Point itself in that dam. Most of the flood control storage is in these upper three reservoirs and a little bit in Fort Randall. Gavin's Point, generally when it was constructed, was kind of there to re-regulate the flows from these dams so that you didn't have, just fluctuating flows, that have provided just a nice, even, steady release into the Missouri River. Just conceptually, this kind of talks about the flood control storage that's offered. Total, there's 16 million, a little over 16 million acre feet of flood control storage. If you want to put a scale to that, if you're familiar with Truman Dam, in central Missouri, Truman Dam offers 4 million acre feet. So in this system, there's about 4 times the flood storage is what Truman Dam has, just for a scale. Again, you can see how much larger these top three reservoirs are. And then you can see that Big Bend and Gavin's Point really don't offer anything as far as the flood control storage. They're like I said, more for re-regulation to smooth the flows out of those others.
Yeah. That's a good chart.
If you put all those 6 reservoirs together, this is how the storage would be. The carryover multiple use zone is a little over half of it, and that's there to try to get us through droughts. That was sized back in the 1940s to get us through the 1930s drought, the Dust Bowl era. So that size of storage there was built to help the basin weather that, to be able to provide water supply and navigation support through a drought. Up here in the top, you see the annual use and then the exclusive flood control. The annual use is really every year we want to try to start the year at this top of this multi-purpose so that we have our full drought savings account. And then if you kind of consider this area up here as the checking account, we get water as the snow melts and the rain comes in. We store water up here in this portion. We can store it there throughout the course of the year and try to get back down by December back down to the base of this multiple use. If we get so much inflow as we did 2010, 2011, where we get up into this exclusive flood control, there is no authority for anything other than just purely flood control when we get up there. So the idea is just to try to get that water, hold it until downstream conditions can allow, and then get it back out. And then have it ready for the next event. So that's kind of just the overview. Current conditions of where we're at, I'm gonna run down. So what comes through the main stem system, those 6 reservoirs, an average year has about 25 million acre feet of water that runs through those. You know, we have 16 million acre feet of flood control storage. So we're kind of managing that 25 million through that 16 million. So you can't ever catch and hold everything.
Right.
The idea is you have to kind of balance it. The snow on the plains is what comes into the system first. It's melting at this time of the year. In fact, we just had most of the plain snowpack in South Dakota just melted off this past couple weeks. So what we have out there, it's actually nice. It came off really slow and smooth because if you hold it too late in the year, you can get these rains on top of it. So that's off of the system right now. So that's good news. About 25% of what comes into these reservoirs annually is that plain snowpack. Then in May and July, we get about another 50% of the inflow to those reservoirs. And that's a combination of what's melting off the mountains and then also the rain that's falling in the basin. And then throughout the rest of the year, we have rainfall. So really, you know, a lot of the big uncertainty that drives is the rainfall and just how much comes, you know, in any given year. So this, I highlight this, and I've provided the presentation for the minutes, but this website up here is a good spot to check. Every week they give an update kind of just the key conditions in the basin. So that top website is a good portion. They update this every Tuesday. So this is fresh data today.
It's on the core, this website's on the
Yeah.
core?
Yep, it's core updated.
Okay.
And this kind of just gives an outlook of, you know, down here in the lower corner, like I said, where each of the big reservoirs are at, the 3 large reservoirs, and where the whole system, if we were if we didn't have any water and flood control, we'd have 56.1 million acre feet in the system. Today we have 57.3, so we've got about 7% of the water, or the flood control occupied today, which is good in the condition where we're at. The current Gavin's Point release is always on here, 35,000 CFS coming out of Gavin's Point right now. And then this is just kind of a look at the year. You can kind of compare how much water we had in the system on any given, well, I guess the bars here are kind of the high and the low and the average for every year that we have in any given month. So this year we're, you know, right here, just, I mean, we're kind of waiting, and the plain snowpack's off. The mountain snowpack is average this year. So we're really setting pretty good in that condition. It'll be rainfall that determines, you know, the total amount of runoff. Something to note is the basin is very wet already. I mean, it was wet last year, it's wet this year, so the soil conditions are saturated, generally in the 95th percentile across the basin. So, you know, so there's a lot of water in the soil, so it isn't going to soak up much if the rain comes down on top of it. So that was kind of a condition we had last year. So a lot of what the forecast they're calling for this year would include, you know, some rain. Just if we had an average rain on top of that saturated soil, we'll get quite a bit of runoff. The lower right, we had looked at this even a week and a half ago. A large portion of South Dakota had about 4 inches of snow water on it. That means if you melted the snow, it'd be 4 inches of water coming off. So oftentimes that's 3 feet of snow or so, you know, to get that much. But that's all melted off. It's in the system. It's flowing out right now. This is just to show, they actually do their forecast for the runoff above Sioux City just because that's kind of their area of what's managed at our division office. It just shows you the fluctuation of how much runoff. So, in 2011 was our record year. We had 61 million acre feet of runoff come through. Again, to put that, you're putting 61 million acre feet of runoff through a 16 million acre foot bucket, or flood control. So that's, just why we end up having so much releases, high releases coming out of the system. Last year, we had almost the exact same amount. We had 60.9, just missed time 2011 by about a tenth of it. One thing to note, it fluctuates year in and year out. The forecast for this year actually is coming in that it would be one of the top 10 events if it occurred as forecasted, top 10 inflow years to the reservoirs. So that's, again, a pretty wet year, is at least what's being on the forecast at this time. But you can just kind of see here how we fluctuate. We usually get the brown years here kind of represent, standard drought years. The 30s here, this is what the system was designed to try to get us through if we go through another one of those. And interesting to note, I just always see this and it's just a gee whiz for me, but we had the record year in 2011, and in 2012 we had one of our lower years immediately following it. We were down here, we were almost in drought during 2011, so we were fighting.
2012.
Well, even in 2011, we were dry locally, and the water was coming down from
I see.
upstream.
I got it, right.
Yeah. So the system outlook this year, again, with the forecast every month, we update our reservoir forecast. This again is the estimate of just the runoff that's going into those up above Sioux City. So what's going through those reservoirs and a little bit of uncontrolled area that comes in just downstream of Gavin's Point. If this forecast were realized, again, this would be the 9th highest runoff on record. Again, it's based on the current conditions, soil conditions, snowpacks, mountain and plains, and then just kind of the existing trends that we've seen out there, kind of the recent past 10 years of average rainfall is what they base this on. And then I think it's important to note this. I take this straight from a presentation that Mr. Remus, the water manager up in Omaha that manages those 6 reservoirs, he said runoff forecast is not a flood forecast. This is the water going through the system. Again, it takes rainfall to have, a flood event down here. So it's time to plan, not to panic. And the releases, the will remain aggressive. They've been really aggressive in letting water out of the system early this year. We've had higher than normal releases all winter long. In fact, we're about twice what we'd normally be letting out right now. So that's trying to ensure that we have space in the reservoirs for the snow melt and the rain that's anticipated this year. These are just the releases. Currently, we're at 35,000 CFS. We anticipate that over the course of the summer, we will have to increase our releases out of Gavin's Point. These are the Gavin's Point releases, up to a little over 42,000 later in the summer. And through the spring, they've been aggressive getting 35, 36,000 out so that they can step back a little bit here during the typical rainy season right down here. So that we're actually going to lower it a little bit to about 33,000, give a little bit of extra room. That extra 4,000 or 5,000 gives about a half foot of extra space in the river right now. And then the lower basic and upper basic. Basic is what they're anticipating. Lower basic, just a little less rain, a little more rain. The upper basic does indicate, I guess that's roundabout, it's about if you had 25% more rain one way or the other. So we could have releases, those 66,000, if we had that, that'd be releases a little higher than what we had last year coming out of the Gavin's Point on average, if we saw that upper basic scenario. Okay. And then there'd be full navigation support with any of these. There'll be plenty of water for boats to be on the river with any of these scenarios. I just wasn't really familiar with how familiar you all are with, this is something the National Weather Service products here that you could find out on the National Weather Service website that I have at the bottom. This is always great information to look at through flood season. they actually do the forecasting for the Missouri River. While we operate those reservoirs, we coordinate with National Weather Service day in and day out.
Wow.
They take our operations. They are the ones that actually forecast, the rain, how much runoff, how quick's it coming to the river. And so they monitor and update, these river forecasts. I just highlighted this because this is something that we even look at, quite a bit. And we get a feed from National Weather Service direct, but, this website's still a good visual. Sure. I highlighted this, just because I think a couple of the questions was about affecting, like the Riverfront Park and some of the other stuff here in Leavenworth. On the Weather Service site, they always identify flood impacts. And they say here at stage 22.3 at Earl's Gauge is when it starts to enter Riverfront Park. And 2nd Street at the wastewater treatment plant is closed due to high water. And so this is kind of I guess I view this as a bit of a threshold for you all to look at. So that 22.3 feet represents about 165,000 CFS in the river. Like I said, the Gavin's Point releases right now are 35,000. So you can still see that's a small bit. It takes quite a bit of rain to come down the system to get up into where it's affecting your all's facilities. But if we do get up to that upper basic scenario where there's 66,000 CFS, then, it still takes another 100,000 to come, rainfall and tributaries to get down here and affect that. So, it's just as you had pointed out, these were the 2 events. These are all the historic crest, and this is also on that same website. The historic crest, of course, 93. I lived through that, sandbagged, and did some work around Oregon, Missouri, and in Riverside. But then last year, again, 2nd highest in March. That was that first event that came through, and then June came in as the 4th highest on record. Okay. So if it seemed wet, it's because it was. Right. So, I throw this one in here just because if you're on the website looking at the Leavenworth one, it's always good because the Weather Service forecasts St. Joseph. And you can always kind of look up there and get an idea. Yeah. It's got a nice contained levee system. So what's coming through St. Joseph isn't broke out, and missing any of the gauges. So it's a good forecast point to keep your all's eyes on and to monitor as you're moving forward. So you can always look at the flow over here that they're forecasting at St. Joseph and kind of bring it back down to your all's site to get an estimate. And finally, I would want to add the National Weather Service. Again, they're the forecasting agency for the Missouri River, and this year, they put out a spring flood outlook every year, and this year they're actually forecasting flooding on the Missouri River, quite a few points along the Missouri River. So what they did is they put out a forecast that gives their estimate of a percent of likelihood of exceeding these thresholds. I don't know if you're all familiar with, but so the current National Weather Service out of Pleasant Hills forecast is to reach flood stage would be in the 60 to 80% chance this year, so likely. It's not uncommon to reach flood stage any given year, but
the flood stage for us, are you saying is a 22? Are you talking about the Riverfront Park and 7th Street? Or?
Oh, I'm sorry. The flood stage, as defined by the Weather Service, is 20, stage 20. So that's about 2 feet below that park impacts level.
Okay.
Now, the moderate stage is 24, as it says here, and that's about 1.5 feet above that impact level to the parks and some of your facilities. Their forecast for moderate is in the 20 to 40% chance. That's the chance that they're forecasting right now that we would see that level of flooding at some point this year. And then the major, gets up to, what we saw last March. And in that, they're down in that 5 to 10% chance of likelihood. So just kind of, as you're looking, again, it's a kind of a time to plan, not panic. And that just kind of frames some of those, some of the forecasts from the Weather Service for you. And then just the communications that we have monthly stakeholder calls. I talked to Chuck. I believe he participates or calls in on those. He has the number that you'd be, if y'all are interested as a city, of calling in. We do have annual spring and fall public meetings. And April 8th, Mr. Remus, our division head of water management that manages those main stem reservoirs, he'll be down presenting kind of the annual plan, and everything I've presented you today is, prepared out of his office. So it's a good opportunity to ask questions directly of the individuals that will be making the decisions for those reservoirs. And the one most local to here is at Smithville, Missouri on the 8th of April at the golf course, and it's at 11 o'clock. So it's at the golf course clubhouse. We've had to kind of go there for a little larger venue. We've had quite a bit of interest over the last couple of years. The website that you have here, actually, generally, if you do a Google search of Core Missouri River, it'll pull you up to the website you have right there. And also, it's on that quad sheet that I provided you. And then that quad sheet is updated every Tuesday, and that's another good source of just getting information. So, with that, I'd offer to answer any questions y'all might have. The story behind this is actually down near Brunswick, Missouri. This poor fruit stripe truck was trying to get along 24 highway, and it was just all flooded last June and July. The levee broke down there. So there's water everywhere down there on 24 highway. He was following his maps, and it kept getting him turns and turns and turns, and he got on a gravel road. Well, the gravel road was the top of the levee. And so he drove that semi. By this point, he had to driven 20 miles on the top of the levee on that gravel road. And by the time he stopped, the levee had broken in front of him. It actually broke behind him. He couldn't go backwards, he couldn't go forwards. He was standing out there. It's probably bad of us. We got a picture from the helicopter, and then we landed and picked him up and took
the ticket?
No. But we landed, took him over to Moberly and dropped him off there and allowed his company to come get him. But that truck sat there for about 2 or 3 months. So it's always nice to just kind of show when you're around flooding, don't blindly follow the.
Did it have produce in it, or was it?
What's that?
Stripe gum.
What was in it? Was there?
I'm not sure.
Isn't that fruit stripe?
Yeah, fruit stripe gum is what it says on it.
Maybe that's just an advertisement.
Yeah.
That's a nice, picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
So, yeah, if
Any questions or
Any questions?
comments from Mr. Schumate? Very interesting
I
presentation.
have a few. I'm wondering if Mr. McDonald and Mr. McGaha can come up, because some of these questions may generate some input. How all this affects us, affects you. Can you go back to one of your original slides where you had 3 main things: navigation, irrigation, and water supply, and then 6 minor things underneath? Yeah. So flood control, navigation, water supply are the most important, and that's what you'll concentrate on. Those 5 below are secondary. Is that correct?
No, I would say that, life safety, the decisions for life safety is the most important. Now, what's most important in any given day, if it's not flooding, then flood control isn't all that important. We might be operating for something else. But what I had said and would say is that most of our decisions are driven by those top 3, just because they're the primary drivers.
Okay.
Of what forces our hand to make a decision. And then the others benefit, from the water that passes through the system for those.
Further to what the mayor had mentioned about navigation, I know up until about 20 years ago, there was a concrete barge that I think would go up to Omaha every day. You'd see one every day coming back and forth. And there has been I would say, maybe 6 barges this year north of Kansas City, maybe. And I'm guessing there, you probably know exactly. So I'm really wondering, and I know it's not your decision, it's probably a political football more than it is the Corps' decision, how much money is put in to make that river navigable north of Kansas City for the limited number of navigation, commercial navigation? People can still take the boats out there if they want, but it just doesn't seem to me that the cost of maintaining that channel, a navigable channel, is, at some point you say, go ahead and take the railroads or take the trucks, because I think that's what killed river barges anyway, at least in this part of the country, and the railroads started getting much more competitive, and probably trucking did too. Any thoughts on that?
That's outside of,
Yeah,
I mean, my
it's
expertise.
political football, I know. but-
Yeah, and I don't have the numbers of how much actually is spent on that at my fingertips here. I mean, I'll give you my contact information. If you really are
Yeah.
interested, we can get some of that to you.
It just, and realistically, west of St. Louis, is there much navigation on the Missouri River between St. Louis and Kansas City? Commercial navigation? I know the Mississippi from St. Louis down to New Orleans is packed with barges, but is the Missouri really that much navigation, commercial navigation?
We've seen, we've seen a fairly high or not fairly high, that's very relative term,
Yeah.
it's a squishy. We've seen an uptick in the amount of, traffic, actually, the companies that are doing some tows down in the lower river, we've actually had a few more involved.
Okay.
They do, there's a couple terminals where they bring fertilizer up in the spring, and, you know, take some grain back down.
Yeah.
Along with, there's been some asphalt barges, again, concrete, some others. Port of KC here in Kansas City is really, taking an active role on trying to revitalize, some of their terminal there as well.
Okay. Now, Mr. McGaha, Mr. McDonald, based on what Mr. Shoemate talked about tonight, what are your thoughts on, I know you can't predict the future, but how does that affect us?
We are always thinking flood. I think in the 90s, the communication between the city and the Corps of Engineers was essentially non-existent. 93 changed all of that, and the ability to get information is so much better now than it ever was. It gets better every year. We work closely with Chuck, and we get the information we need when we need it. We are ready to address flooding issues. The community's invested in the flood wall at the community center, which took a lot of the edge off of forecasting, if you will.
Right.
We can respond fairly quickly to flood events, and the chart he showed, it should be no mystery to those who pay any attention at all to what we put out when the river's coming up. We watch it very closely, and Chuck gets us the inside scoop, which is amazingly enough a lot like the chart. So no secret channel for better information. But we are prepared. We watched that this time of year. It's hard to believe that it was just a year ago we were in an overnight. Brian got Employee of the Year for his efforts to get the sandbags up. Even with the flood wall at the community center, the flood was so high, we had to go to our next level to be fully protected, which meant sandbags.
Commissioners understand that when we monitor the river, we're not monitoring just here in Leavenworth. I mean, we're looking up in Nebraska, what's going on up there, because like Eric had stated, the North Platte River, there's the James River that runs up there, and all that runs in unprotected. And so we're always looking at what's going on up there as far as forecast and things of that nature. And then we go all the way up, you know, Brownville, all the way downstream to see how the river's reacting. I know our communications with Mike is on a regular basis. If we think something is going to, you know, affect the city, we try to get as much information out there as soon as possible so we can go and place the plan in effect.
When the flood stage starts at 20 feet, did you say, Mr. Shoemate? 20, and obviously it doesn't affect our parks. At what point does the river back up the creeks? 3 Mile Creek, 5 Mile Creek, Stranger, I know, reacts to a quick rainstorm, but if the river's high enough, that creek won't flow in either, is that correct?
Stranger Creek actually dumps into the Kansas River, so that doesn't affect us
Okay.
on the Missouri side. But understand that at 20 feet, which is our flood level here, when we consider it flood, it's flooding 3 miles downstream or 3 miles upstream. So I want to make sure you understand that.
Right.
It's at 22 feet is when it starts affecting the city.
Okay.
As far as backing up, you know, yes, it's going to start backing up 3 Mile Creek, 5 Mile Creek, so on and so forth. Mike would have a better take on that than I would as far as how the impact on the city would be.
You'll see, as water starts approaching really anything over about 15 feet, you'll see water that's not moving at 3 Mile Creek there at Leavenworth Landing Park. And as the water continues to come up, you'll have that essentially slack water clear up as far as 6th Street, 7th Street. People that fish like that a lot because fish will go where the moving water changes to slow water. That's where all the food ends up. So there's a lot of people who fish at that level. That is really the most dangerous time for the city is if the river is up, even if we're not worried about flooding and we're well protected. If we get a thunderstorm, a couple inches in an hour, there's all kinds of trouble because the creek's already full.
Yeah.
It'll flood in different places than it normally does.
Could I, very briefly, with what happened in 1993 with that, I think it was June and July, where we had the flooding and everything, what major steps did the city take to, put the city in a better position to deal with it in future years, just very briefly?
Basically, we became much more aware of the problem. We were kind of the early discussion is this is going to be happening more often. We see changes in the climate, if you will. It may cause us to see this more frequently. So the staff that we had in '93, we did not want to go through the unpreparedness exercise of the community center sandbagging, and we began pursuing that project. We worked to ensure we had adequate supplies of material, sandbags and sand and such. But I think the most important thing is we started communicating better than we ever have with emergency management and with the Corps of Engineers about what's going to happen. I moved here in 1988, and they said, yeah, the river comes up about once a year, kind of closes 2nd Street, and then it goes away. That was the information that we had. And that was 5 years later, we were in fairly desperate circumstances.
But that flood wall that's kind of on the eastern part of the Riverfront Community Center, that was one thing that was, built after?
That was the genesis for that, came from '93.
But we just didn't put that, that's been only 5 years ago,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's only been on
Takes
5 years.
Okay, well, that's a good point.
Yeah. In today's Leavenworth Times, and I doubt that you subscribe to Leavenworth Times, you may, but Matt Novak, who is kind of conservationist, he writes on fishing and hunting and all kinds of things like that. I didn't read it real closely, but he's talking about the Missouri River and, potential of flooding, et cetera, and I thought it was apropos for tonight's discussion. One of his recommendations, and I'm not necessarily espousing this, but he said, that from Gavin's Point down, the flooding and all the farmland, most of it's farmland, obviously some cities have been affected, but the amount that's paid out on these flood years for farm insurance or whatever is very high, and there's a heck of a loss of crops. He was almost proposing, or a proponent of, buying out that farmland from those farmers at a fair price, and then not be as concerned with, the river going out of the banks in those, what would formerly be agricultural areas, and only work on protecting the cities, the commercial property. And I know that's not your decision, but I thought you might find that interesting. I didn't read it real closely, but I'm going to read it again tonight. But I mean, it is a thought, because I imagine primarily your responsibility during flooding events is protect life safety and probably buildings, et cetera, and then agriculture probably comes secondary to that. Am I correct?
Oh, during the flood event, the main stem decisions are kind of driven by runoff and how much water's in the reservoir and downstream. But then, locally in the Kansas City district, we, our focus is with the levee districts, our partners out there. The levee districts, we're trying to support them through those flood events, help give them all the information they need for their flood fight. Mm-hmm. And then afterward, no levee can prevent all flooding. So, right. There's a top to them, and this last year we had several that had overtopped or breached, and so we participate in the rehabilitation following the flood events. So that's, I mean, where our focus goes whenever we're in a flood event and then following.
Well, Mr. McGaha or Ms. McDonald, what questions are we not asking? What questions do you want to ask that we can hear? We don't know the stuff like you guys do.
I think one of the mitigation efforts that myself and working with Mike and actually, I think either Lansing Correction Facility or Lansing putting in the wire gauge, I mean the remote gauge.
Right, yeah, the live gauge is a key part of that effort.
Yeah, because without that, we'd have to look at what was going on in Kansas City, and then we'd have to look what was going on in St. Joe and make a best guess. With us getting the gauge right here at Leavenworth, it really made an expedient effort. So I want to make sure that you folks understand that I know there's an annual funding that goes towards that. The county pays a portion of that, and then, like I say, Lansing and Leavenworth pay the other portion of that for the interest of the citizens in the community as well.
Prior to that, Chuck's staff would go out there in dire times, and they would drop the line down and measure the distance. And that's no way to run a railroad today's.
It's an old wire gauge, and I remember going out there and the flying carp jumping over the walkway. It's like, okay, let's wear the hard hat and be done with this. So.
One thing, it was mentioned, levies this and levies that. There is a difference in levies between kind of the levies that are certified as like flood, flood rated, and you can build big industrial or commercial projects behind, and agricultural levies. They're two separate thought processes. I don't know if you wanted to comment on some of that.
Each levy we have in our, there's three types of levies, I guess, generally out along the Missouri River. There's the federally funded, federally built, designed. Those are federal levies. Those are some of the ones that you see, like say around some of the, like St. Joseph, Kansas City. But then also we have federal levies that are, opposite bank here. That's I think levy unit 408 and 400 downstream of that. Those were federally funded. So if there's an effect, if there's damages to those levees from a flood event, the federal government designs repairs and fully funds the repairs. On these others, we have non-federal units, is kind of what we call them. They're still participants in our Public Law 8499 program, and they were typically designed, or maybe not even designed, just built in the past, and then came along, and as long as they maintain their levy to a standard, we participate in the recovery of any damages there. That's cost shared, 80-20, 80 federal government, 20 local. But then, and then there's also other levies you'll see out around here that just, aren't in our program. The locals have built those to be out there, and, just their local flood fight efforts, so.
For that third category of levies, do you have to give them, those local governments or governing bodies, permission to do that in this Missouri River Basin, or even for the third, or not?
I mean, there's not much out there that doesn't have a levy right now, so it's pretty much what's there is already there, so.
There is an extensive permitting process for building anything that obstructs the water.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Shoemate or Mr. McDonald or Mr. McGaha?
Very interesting, though.
Thank you very much,
That's very
Mr. Shoemate, for coming, and we learned a lot, and hopefully it'll help us in our carrying out our duties.
All right, and I was gonna, you moved on here. I did supply my, if you have any questions, contact information is on here.
Okay.
I can always take a call and just try to help if you're hearing something or whatever,
Well, I hope we don't see you on TV over the next 18 months, because that's usually a bad sign.
I hope for everybody else, we're not seeing me on TV either. So, I guess just the one takeaway is, we're anticipating quite a bit, or we're anticipating one of our top 10 years, you might hear that, but it's still, the forecast is almost half of what last year's runoff was, so. Well, it could be a top 10, it's not dire, where we're at right now, so again, it takes rainfall, and that's just what we don't know right now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you very
appreciate your
much.
job. The next is a mayor's appointment. So I'm going to move to reappoint to the Sidewalk Advisory Board, Mr. Brian Paxton and Mr. Steve Weisenflue, to terms ending March 15th, 2023.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to reappoint Sidewalk Advisory Board, Mr. Paxton and Mr. Weisenflue, to terms ending March 15th, 2023. We will begin voting with Mr. Commissioner Preisinger.
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. Vote is 5-0, so we've made these reappointments official. Next is the policy report, 2020 federal legislative program.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, each year ahead of the city's trip to Washington DC to meet with our federal partners, our elected representatives, and of course the Pentagon and the Bureau of Prisons, the City Commission approves a federal legislative program. We send this ahead to everybody that we meet with at those meetings to give them sort of a heads up of what's going on in the city and what our priorities are. Prior to formulating this, as we did this year, Mayor Griswold and I have met with leadership at Fort Leavenworth, have met with leadership at the VA. We actually have a meeting with the warden at the BOP coming up shortly to get an idea of what their issues are. We try to advocate for those entities as our federal partners. This document has been the same format for many years, starting with our 3 federal partners, and then just a few priorities. Most of the city's day-to-day priorities fall within the state legislative agenda that we passed earlier in the year, but there are a couple federal issues that we like to point out to our delegation. I'm just going to briefly go over some of the changes that we've made through our meetings with the leadership, then open it up for any questions or adoption, and then we'll send this ahead of our trip to Washington coming up here at the end of the month. For Fort Leavenworth, last year we included this Defense Community Infrastructure Program. This is a brand new program that the city helped get passed through our relationship and our partnership with the Association of Defense Communities. It's $50 million is the initial year for this current fiscal year of DoD dollars that can be used outside an installation to support infrastructure that supports the installation. So this was a new thing. $50 million is very small for the number of military installations around the country, but it's a start. So we're advocating to increase that to $100 million for the next fiscal year. And then we went ahead and asked for 2 things. We asked for 2 of our projects to be considered for those dollars. The first one is Centennial Bridge. For the first time, I think we can make the case that there are now federal dollars that are appropriate for Centennial Bridge. We've heard from the Kansas Department of Transportation that any project that has multiple funding agencies at any level, that will help their standing. So if we have some federal input, some local dollars, some federal dollars, and some local dollars to go with the massive amount of state dollars, that may improve our chances of getting the Centennial Bridge moved up. So we're asking for some level of allocation from the Defense Communities Infrastructure Program for the Centennial Bridge. And then the second one is the water line. The Leavenworth Water Department, located directly adjacent to Fort Leavenworth, generates more than enough capacity to serve all of Fort Leavenworth. There's currently about a 100-year-old emergency line that is the only connection between those 2 entities. So we're asking, it's about a $2 million project to install a brand new line. That'll provide, the big key word for these dollars is resiliency, utility resiliency, and water. It doesn't get more resilient the need than water. So we're asking for those 2 projects to be considered by our federal delegation.
Do you have any idea what the cost to replace that water line would be approximately?
About $2 million.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the other 2, there's no change from last year. Intergovernmental service agreements, those exist now through the Association of Defense Communities. They're asking their members to advocate to lengthen those contracts from 10 to 20 years. So it helps with the amortization of a capital expenditure. If that's involved in the intergovernmental service agreement, it makes it more palatable for an agency if they know they can sign a 20-year agreement. Sustainment, restoration, and modernization funding. This is the money that the Army gives Fort Leavenworth to upkeep their old buildings. That's always gets a small piece of the pie because of course, all the funds going to warfighting or to readiness. So we ask, because of the age of Fort Leavenworth, that adequate funding be provided to upkeep the facilities at Fort Leavenworth. The city also, Taylor puts together a beautiful packet of what we've done over the last year. It shows our lofts, our hotels, any new developments, anything we've done for, that could be in service to Fort Leavenworth, the families there that come to our community each year, that also, of course, benefit our community, but show our dedication to Fort Leavenworth. We also highlight our activities during the year, partnership in the local government management fellowship, the military spouse economic empowerment zone, and of course last year or 2 years ago, our recognition as a Purple Heart community. For the U.S. Penitentiary Leavenworth, our two items have not changed. They are the new medium security facility and also the renovation for USP Leavenworth. That's similar to the SRM funding for the existing facility, the second oldest prison in the system. You'll notice in the new medium security facility, I have put in here, and it's a public record, that Congress has appropriated $364 million for a facility in Leavenworth. That still is subject to final congressional approval. So that's just BOP dollars. So nothing's official, nothing's final. That still has to be approved, and that's in process. And so we don't know anything about if that when that would happen. The VA Medical Center, so they didn't have any direct federal issues that they wanted us to advocate for. In the past, we'd had a private hospital. That's sort of gone away. They did indicate a very strong support at the local VA level to ask us to press our leadership for federal support for a veterans home. That meshes well with the state's, some House bill and a Senate bill that is in the state right now to support a veterans home. And so the federal match on that is 65% federal funding. So we plan to advocate with our legislators to prioritize that funding for Leavenworth or anywhere in the eastern half of Kansas. I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to support veterans, whether it's here or Topeka. We, of course, like it here, but as long as we get one in this part of the state, I think that's important. They continue to ask us to advocate for the Chapel of Veterans, which is, of course, not open because of the structural deficiencies in that building. The repair estimate is $4 to $5 million, and we continue to ask our federal delegation to find some sort of, whether it's through the National Park Service, through the VA, to get that facility, that unique, truly unique facility back open. Even though we included it in the Fort Leavenworth section, we still have our section on Centennial Bridge because of its extreme importance to the city of Leavenworth. So we put the characteristics, sort of give an update of where that is with the Centennial Bridge. We broke out for a full page, or I broke out for a full page issue, community development block grants. We did receive a little bit extra funding last year, but that's still below its height of funding, about 25% since fiscal year 2010. There is no better direct correlation from federal dollars to helping citizens in this community than the Community Development Block Grant. It goes to the service agencies, CASA, the Alliance Against Family Violence, Catholic Charities, directly to our citizens, and also provides funding for first-time home buyer program, emergency home repair. It's done parks projects in the past. A lot of good comes from that, and that goes directly from the federal government into our community.
And those funds come from the Housing and Urban Development
Yes, sir.
Cabinet Agency?
And we're an entitlement community, which we also ask them to preserve that designation, where the money comes directly from HUD. There's been moves in the past to give it to the state, and then you would compete against other communities in the state. And we continue to advocate to keep the entitlement city designation so we can get those direct dollars and put them into the community. Safe communities, this is the police officer. This is the couple different grants that we've have gotten in the past and continue to receive, the COPS grant and the Burn Justice grants. Those are needed for our police department, for equipment, for personnel, for a variety of different reasons. And then finally, our last individual item that we're always concerned about is water quality, water treatment. We just really ask for fair, simple, flexible federal regulations, municipal stormwater runoff that allows for cost-effective development, but also doesn't put the blame for any kind of nutrient removal or shoulder the burden on cities. There's a lot of agricultural runoff. Everybody's involved in this. So we just continue, it's sort of a blanket request that any restrictions or regulation from the EPA keep small cities in mind. And so we always like to keep that in the forefront with our federal delegation when we go. So that concludes the main issues for the 2020 federal legislative program. Again, the plan right now is we would be there, leave on March 29th, meetings with our full federal delegation representatives and senators, and then the Bureau of Prisons and the Pentagon.
Will you be meeting with any of the Missouri delegation this time?
We did reach out to the representative on the Missouri side. We haven't got scheduled yet. And we also reached out to Representative Roger Marshall from Western Kansas, who is running for Pat Roberts' seat, and it's kind of a favorite to just sort of have that, make that connection if he becomes the senator.
That's a good idea. Great. Good report.
I thought it was an excellent package, particularly in terms of the aspects of the program that we are advocating for. Strong arguments have been documented in the package. The only thing I recommended was, and this really was based on Mr. Kramer and I's meeting with Mr. Formica, who's the Deputy Commanding General of the Combined Arms Center in Fort Leavenworth about 2 weeks ago. He just told us to remember that Fort Leavenworth is more than the Command and General Staff College and the prison, and certainly I know that, and so I beefed up, just with that, I beefed up based on my knowledge and going to the website and my knowledge and experience there of the description to make it a little bit more fulsome. And so while I was doing that, I did it a little bit with the Eisenhower Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and then a little bit with the United States Penitentiary Leavenworth. There wasn't much to add there, but so that's what I think the city manager just
Good idea.
handed out to you, and that was
Very nice.
my input there.
Good job.
So, any other questions or comments for the city manager on this particular agenda item? If not, I will entertain a motion to adopt.
Adopt with the changes
With
to the descriptions.
Yes,
Yep.
with the changes as far as the descriptions of the three federal facilities that we have here in Leavenworth and that we support.
So moved.
Yeah, second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on, yeah, that's
Just
fine.
repeat
Yeah,
it. You just said it, so.
That's fine, I mean, that's perfectly acceptable. So, we have a motion and a second on this particular agenda item. We are going to begin voting with Commissioner Wilson.
Aye.
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 The ayes have it, the motion, the vote is 5-0, so we've approved the 2020 federal legislative program for our city of Leavenworth. Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Thank you.
Next is consider purchase of refuge truck.
Mike McDonald, our Public Works Director, and Curtis Marks, our Operations Superintendent for this item.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, this is a budgeted item to replace to purchase a new refuse truck this year. The city operates a fleet of 5 refuse trucks. There are 11 employees associated with picking up trash, putting it in the trucks, and getting the trucks to the landfill and back. The research that we've done and the trucks that we've purchased in the last few years has led us to look closely at the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Program that we have bought many items from in the recent years. And as a consequence, essentially the truck that we would normally spec is available through Sourcewell. And after reviewing the specifics of that with the Finance Director, we do recommend that the City Commission approve purchase of the new truck through Sourcewell of $194,458.31. This is a scheduled replacement, which is probably the more interesting part of the discussion. The truck will look just like the ones that we have and hopefully perform well. Typically at least 10 years before they get traded in as we move on. You're certainly well aware that in 2019 we began hauling our municipal solid waste to Deffenbaugh, or formerly Deffenbaugh, now Waste Management Landfill in Shawnee. That is a big change for our operation. The city used to haul trash to Hams Quarry and other landfills. However, the city has grown considerably, so it's just not as easy as going back to the way that it was. You recall we changed the route structure late last year to balance them out because there were days last year where refuse crews oftentimes were getting done at 7 o'clock at night, and in a couple of instances, they did not get done and had to come back on Friday morning to finish. We would like to provide a better level of service to our residents as well as a little less of a workload for our employees. It pointed out to staff that the whole operation is pretty sensitive to having vacancies with employees as well as having refuse trucks that are not available for a variety of reasons. They're broken down, they're in the repair shop, or they're stuck in a gigantic line of trucks at the landfill. And Curtis brought it to me, and we've talked about it for a lengthy period of time, is to recommend that we not trade in the current truck, but to keep it as a reserve truck to ensure that we have some backup capacity should one of our 5 trucks go down. One of the things that's important to note is in the past, we would normally run, in the summer, you would generally run 4 trucks on 3 days and 5 trucks on the fourth day, typically Thursday. But by balancing the routes out, we're driving down to the landfill, we generally are using 5 trucks most days. And if one of them is not available, having the backup truck lets us continue to put trash in there. Some other operational things that I kind of enter into this discussion is with 11 employees and Steve King, our solid waste foreman, who's here. That's really 12 people to, you're not going to have 6 trucks on the road. You don't have enough people for that. But you will probably most likely have 2 trucks headed to or coming back from the landfill with that leaves you 9 people. The basic operational trash trucks, the driver, and 2 collectors. And so that fits well with the 5-truck program. The 6th one is truly a backup, proposed to be retained as a backup vehicle. Took some convincing from Curtis and Steve for me to go that way. It'll be known in my books as I've called this fleet creep in the past. You don't want to have things sitting around that you're not using, but as this is part of one of the essential services we provide, and we had problems meeting our goals last year without an extra truck. We want to see if we can keep this truck, to use it, to see if that makes any difference in our ability to meet our goals of serving the citizens.
Is that truck 3387? Is that the truck?
Yes, sir.
You had it as one of the exhibits, just the cost of maintenance for this particular truck. Is that kind of typical of one of the trucks, or is that higher? Or
This is higher.
Okay.
That is, if you have to pick a truck to keep, I would not have picked this one, but I wouldn't have picked any of the 2 trucks we traded in the last few
Previously,
years
okay.
either.
Right.
So this one is really, it's the truck you know. We've fixed a lot of the things on it. Typically, looking over the records for the last 10 years, you're going to spend about $15,000 to $20,000 a year on a trash truck in maintenance. And the maintenance numbers include the packer body also, and that's your tires.
Sure.
That's the whole kit and caboodle.
Right.
So this one would have been right on target with that, except for there was a $43,000 disaster in 2015, which I believe was an all-new engine.
It was PTOs, actually several different things that compiled to make that amount. The truck basically was in '08, I believe, and basically the EPA put regulations down for emissions in '07 that had to be met. So '08 was basically the year that when the trucks came out, they had to meet those regulations. So the truck was basically a guinea pig, in my opinion. It was a truck that we needed to test it in the fire, put it out there to see what it can do. And unfortunately, there were some things we had to deal with for several years, some issues we had to deal with. But Mr. McDonald's exactly correct. It's what we know. It's a truck that we've invested in, and I think it would service us very well to have it as a backup.
Had a pretty good year in 2019 as far as the.
Yeah, it's trying to hang on.
Yeah. So hopefully that'll be the case going forward. What, I mean, in terms of wear and tear, I mean, those trucks are always, pulling forward, I mean, that's part of what is just the whole.
Right,
deal as far as
in
making-
'07, when the emission regulation was put out by the EPA, it was basically for over the road. The work that's done with trash trucks, as we all know, is stop and start, stop and start. So that's some things we had to work through, and I think it went like to 2010 for an upgrade and then 2014 for emission standards. So all the companies, the industries, the manufacturers were trying to meet those standards. So we kind of got caught up into that, and it's a truck, again, that we are very familiar with. I know the expenses have been pretty high on it, but
No kidding.
yeah.
That's okay. Well, that's not okay, but I appreciate you sharing the information with us. Hopefully, we can keep on a trend of 2019 rather than some of the previous years. Are all the trucks the same manufacturer for all the trucks, or different?
That's something we're working towards. Mr. McDonald mentioned Sourcewell. That's something we're able to do, is to try to bring uniformity so we have same make, model. Not necessarily year, but replace them as need be. So.
Okay, questions or comments? Commissioner Preisinger?
2 questions. One, if we approve this, when will you get it?
Within 30 days, I think it's in the
Oh,
policy.
really? Is that one on the showroom floor?
Well-
There is such a thing.
You're pulling from a national pool, I guess.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be, it's not like a fire truck that you have to wait
Have to build.
14 months to build it.
With your blessing and approval, it'll be within 30 days.
Okay, and second question is for Mr. Marks and Mr. King, and if you want to come forward, Mr. King, please do. I know a couple of years ago, the county just dropped on us, they raised the tipping fee at the transfer station 40–50% just overnight, say these are the new fees. And that's when we had to go out to look at, is it more cost effective for us to go down to Deffenbaugh, or what was once Deffenbaugh, I think it's what, Waste Management now. And I'm sure you still do the evaluation based on the tipping fees the county is charging. Is it still cost effective for us, including the labor, the gas mileage, and the wear and tear on the truck, still cost effective for us to go to Deffenbaugh?
Yes, when I was doing some calculations myself last year, and it came out to about $160 more per load average to go to the transfer station than to go down the highway.
And really, even with labor and everything else, well, hopefully the county can relook at that, but we have to make those decisions. That's, I mean, that helps explain why you see a Leavenworth truck going down K7 than 435 to Deffenbaugh, so it does still make sense. Thank you for at least always looking at that.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments for the 3 gentlemen in front of us? If not, I will entertain a motion on this agenda item.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we purchase the said trash truck from, what's it?
Sourcewell, right?
Sourcewell in the amount of $194,458.31.
I second.
There's a motion and a second on this particular agenda item. We are going to begin voting with Commissioner Preisinger.
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. The vote is 5-0. So we've approved the purchase of this new unit outright for the quoted purchase price of the $194,458.31. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next agenda item, I believe, is the consent agenda, so I will turn it over to Commissioner Leonhard.
Okay, I move to approve claims for February 22nd, 2020 through March 6, 2020 in the amount of $1,722,836.61. Net amount for payroll number 5, effective February 28th, 2020, in the amount of $350,499.22. Includes police and fire pension of $12,131.63.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on this consent agenda. Are there any questions from my fellow commissioners on this agenda item? If not, we'll begin voting with Commissioner Wilson.
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. The motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Commissioner Leonhard. I think that's the last formal agenda item. So I'm going to go around the horn and begin with our city manager, Mr. Kramer.
Yeah, I just have a couple good news updates to give you all. Stubby Park renovation project, the equipment is expected to be in on March 13th. So once they get the equipment in, they'll start installing it. And then after they install it, they'll start putting the sidewalks in and all the other amenities. So excited to have that start maybe by the end of the week. The batting cages at Eagles have been graded out and formed up. Kirsten is doing the concrete, and the material for the cages around them should be in shortly, so they'll start building those batting cages at Eagles. Quick update on the youth basketball. This was the first year our pilot program is now complete. Playing outside just our city rec league, 5th and 6th grade boys played against Lansing, and that went really well. And the reason we only did 5th and 6th grade is the different age groups with the girls and then the different age groups within the boys have very different rules. Basketball heights, rim heights, they changed a lot, so that was the most conducive. But we were also able to get the 6th grade girls a home and away series with what's called Independence Middle School, which is the homeschool kids in the county, and that went very well too. So I think we did a good job in our first year reaching out to other Parks and Rec departments, and we'll see if we can build on that going forward. A flood cleanup update. The park looks really good. If you haven't had a chance to go look at it, Riverfront Park is cleaned up, and they have gotten all the silt piles out of Landing Park. There's still some work to get it. It's on the other side of the fence to push it now more toward the river, but they have cleaned that up. There was a lot of silt, so good work by the Parks and Recreation Department.
How did they get on the other side of the fence without falling in?
They used a bobcat.
But is there enough?
No, they take a excavator, mini excavator, and they just literally brush it in slowly. Yeah.
I just see somebody take a bobcat.
That was the universal sign for the mini excavator.
In the river, yeah. Bobcat in the river.
And then finally, on the park side, 3 Mile Creek cleanup project update. We have the year completely booked for that program till November. So we just have 2 spots open for November and December, and the first group is scheduled to go either late this week or early next week, depending on the weather. So that was a popular and successful program last year, going strong again this year. And then finally, I did want to mention to the commission, I've already informed you, but anybody listening, city leadership, along with the county and then fire districts, other cities in the county, met last week at the Leavenworth County Health Department for a COVID-19 or a coronavirus meeting. Jamie Miller, the director of the health department, brought all the community leaders, public safety officials, school superintendents, representatives from the school districts together. There's no magical advice other than communication. Continue to be mindful about your employees not coming to work, if they're sick, what the warning signs are. But again, right now, it's a precaution and preventative. Internally, we've talked a little bit about what does essential staff really look like in the light of a virus. Again, don't want to alarm anything, but always be prepared rather than, time to prepare, not panic, I guess, is kind of, as borrowing from Eric Shoemate. So that's where we are. We're mindful of it, and we're working internally on that.
Quick question on the Riverfront Park. Is it going to open April 1?
Yeah, I was hoping Steve would stick around. I believe so. I think we have our campground manager. Yeah, and I think that it is. We'll put something out for sure on the website if we haven't already,
So
but
they've already
plans to
hired,
open. The same gentleman from years
okay, good.
past. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kramer. Commissioner Wilson, anything?
Nothing.
Commissioner Leonhardt?
There is a ribbon cutting tomorrow at 4 o'clock. It's the Deeper Window Association. That's at 729 Pennsylvania.
Okay, good.
If you want to go out to support them.
Anything else?
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Preisinger?
I have nothing.
Commissioner Bowder?
I just want to make a few comments about our parade. St. Patrick's Day Parade is next Tuesday. The lineup starts no earlier than 11 o'clock. The parade starts at noon. And an important thing for people to know is there is no throwing of candy from the floats. I'm on that committee, and our insurance is very high, and that's one thing that we cannot do. It's illegal in the city. No moving vehicles. Candy cannot be thrown from any moving vehicles. If you want to walk it along the side, you're welcome to. kids love it. They always have their little bags there waiting, so.
Right, hand it out to them.
We haven't banned candy completely, but if they continue to throw from floats, we may have to do that. So please be cautious out there. Thank you.
Thank you. My only update is to let the citizens of our city know that, along with the city manager, I am going to conduct a virtual town hall via Facebook on 20 March 2020. It'll begin at 10 a.m. And so for our citizens out there, if you go on to the city government's Facebook page and like our Facebook page, it'll come up automatically, I think, on their feed when we start going live with the virtual town hall at 10 a.m. on the 20th of March. And as far as questions, I think 5 to 7 days ahead of time, we'll put out something. If citizens want to submit questions ahead of the virtual town hall, that's fine. I don't think I want to do it 10 days in advance, but 5 to 7 days, we'll put that information out and we'll see how it goes, and hopefully it'll be a success. And if that's the case, we'll do it again in the future after this one on the 20th. So, anything else? If not, I will make a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn today's meeting. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, motion carries, so we are adjourned.